Isn't it good to see Todd? Oh, he just left. Isn't it good to see Todd here? All right. I like to call him the Reverend. Y'all use that, Reverend. Reverend Todd. He likes that. He likes those titles. No, don't do that. I'll get in trouble. I promise. Don't do it. Today, we're going to continue this series, this one series, and I want to talk to you today about one true God. And I know being in a church setting, you know, you're kind of like, oh, I already got that, but I want to talk about different things in our lives that kind of take over and become gods. In other words, things in our lives that take the place of God. And the thing is, we got to understand, we've got things fighting for our heart, for control of our heart, and our hearts automatically control our lives, right? And we've got gods that are sitting there fighting for it that we don't know about. And I'm not talking about like Buddha or, you know, these different religious gods. I'm talking about normal, everyday things that captivate our attention. And sometimes it draws more attention than it should. And it starts running interference with the relationship we're supposed to have with God. And the thing is that we do things opposite of the instructions that God gives us, you know. We start taking things out of context, start taking gifts that God gave us out of context. And then we become living a life that's struggling, and because we're doing things our way instead of God's way. It's because these other gods start suiting our selfish wants, our desires, and our own pleasures instead of following, like I said, the instructions we had. A while back, I got to knock something off of my bucket list. Anybody got a bucket list? You got things you want to do before you die? Right, I've gotten pretty good at knocking some things off, but a few years ago, I got to go whitewater rafting. Like, that was one of my big things I wanted to do. And my wife is like, she boats and water, she doesn't mix with that at all, you know. So it took us a while to be able to go do this, but eventually we got to go to Colorado. I think we went down the Arkansas River, which goes through the Royal Gorge. I think it's right. But anyway, I was excited, you know, I was finally get to go. So I was pumped on my way down there, and I'm thinking we're just going to jump right in and go at it, right? Because that's my style. I don't want to follow instructions. I don't need a prerequisite to fill out. I want to just go. I want to have a raft and get some water, right? Hence the name, whitewater rafting. I think that's all you need. Just jump in and go. But unfortunately, we had to sit through like a 30-minute class before we could even touch a boat, look at a boat. And the thing that was messed up about it was basically all they did was give you instructions on how not to die. I mean, that was it. You know, and I'm thinking, guys, you got to understand, my wife is barely hanging on as it is, and now you're talking, there's a good chance we're going to die doing this, you know. So I had to sit through how to properly put your life vest on, you know, your helmet, instructions in case you flip over. You know, I know my wife's only hearing, you know, put on your life vest a certain way or you're going to die. Put on your helmet a certain way or you're going to die, you know. But it was funny because some of the instructions for going down the river was if we flipped over. And they used this. They said, it's not if you flip over, it's when you flip over. So I'm like, probably not going to get to do this, you know. My wife's probably going to be gone. But they said, you know, if the raft flips over, don't grab it. And I'm thinking the only thing floating in the water you tell me not to grab. That's not good. They said, you know, if you can swim the shore, swim the shore. He said, but there's a couple of areas where it's a couple miles long where there is no shore, so you're just going to have to float. There was other areas where they said there was class 5 rapids. I mean, these are like the big ones. You know, this is the reason I went to this river, because I wanted the big ones, you know. And at that point, they bring in people on kayaks to support. In other words, they said, we got guys out here that are going to help pick you guys up when you fall in the water. And the bad thing about it was they said when they get near you, you hug the front of their boat. And when they yell, hold your breath, you got to hold your breath because you're going underwater. I'm thinking, I don't know if that sounds like they're helping us or if they're hindering. I mean, because to me, that sounds like they're going to try and drown you. But the thing is that I was all about going and just jumping in. I didn't care about the instructions, but obviously they were important. These guys that do these rafting trips, man, they're pretty big experts on it. You know, they talk about these trips they've taken in the Grand Canyon. So obviously they knew what they were talking about, and it was important that they relayed that to us. But the thing is that those instructions they gave us could have helped us. You know, if we'd have just jumped in, there was a good chance we might have been injured or got hurt or even killed. But the fact that we went through this and we gained some of this knowledge was the fact that maybe it would help us eventually. Help us to live a better life, maybe help us to survive. And to me, that's kind of how I relate to Scripture. You know, a lot of times we want to jump right into living a life and living it the way we know how best or the way we want to best. And the thing is we don't concern ourselves with the knowledge that it takes to survive and to live a better life. And I think it was God's intent behind the Ten Commandments. You know, the Ten Commandments, a lot of people say, oh, that's Old Testament, that's old school, we don't need that. You know, it's outdated, it's irrelevant. But to me, I think it's something you shouldn't overlook. Especially the first one. You know, if it's number one, it probably means it's pretty important, right? And it says, you must not have any other God but me. And to me, if we ace that one, if we got number one right, I don't think we need the other 9. Like if we solely focused on having no other gods in our lives but the one true God, we wouldn't need these other 9. I mean, God isn't expressing us that He wants to be our only God because He's got some insecurity. The thing is that He didn't want to share us with something that might cause us harm. We can't look at it as a rule giver or a rule maker or a rule enforcer, but more as a God that doesn't want the worst for you. See, He knows what He's got in mind for us, you know, and it grieves Him to see the choices that we make out of ignorance. You know, to me, it's like having a dog, right? You love your dog. You get him a bowl with his name on it. You even get the little riser, you know, so he doesn't have to bend all the way over to drink his water, and you pour clean water in there. And then what does he do? Walks right by and sticks his head in the toilet, right? It's like, this is what's best. And the thing is, I think that's kind of what we're doing, you know. Sometimes in life, we walk right past the living water that God's offered for us, and we go to something that's disgustingly inferior. But the thing is that we've got to understand there are no alternatives. You know, there's not an executive God. There's no honorary God. There's no interim God. There's only one true God. And the thing is, He didn't want to share us with anything. I never understood. We served a God that's jealous. I never understood that, you know, because to me, jealousy was kind of like a weakness. But in God's case, it's like He doesn't want anything bad for us. And He knows that anything apart from Him is bad. But the thing is sometimes we allow other things to become gods and control our lives. And it's best to understand this by knowing that we are all worshipers. You know, we all worship something. And it's not about being saved and being a worshiper. Worship has nothing to do with being in church or religion or even a music genre. It's just worship is who we are. It's a human thing. It's intertwined within our DNA. Our lives take the shape of what we care about most. And the object of our worship will become our future and will define our lives. What we put our interest in. If you hadn't noticed, our society is geared toward this. Man, have you ever just sat and watched the commercials, the TV ads on TV? Right? They're marketed towards the worshiper in all of us. Right? If you're not happy, if you're depressed, if you're bored, buy this and it'll make it better. Right? Eat at this restaurant, drive this car, talk about this medication with your doctor, it'll change your world. Go here on vacation. I love the ones that gear towards the young men having trouble with the women, right? Spray this body spray on you, man, and the girls will come flocking. It's crazy. But it's all marketed towards our DNA of worship. It wants to grab a hold of our attention. So because we're all worshipers, I think God had to add a little enforcement to that first commandment. And when He made number 2, it says, you must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. It says you must not bow down to them and worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God and will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. To me, the number 2 commandment is kind of like the DIY. You know, do it yourself. It's like a do-it-yourself God. Don't hammer out some God out of something that wasn't intended to be. See, we inherit gods without realizing it because they're so common. The smallest thing in our life can become what we place our worship on, and therefore become a god. See, don't be misled into thinking that this is something from the Old Testament days. You know, you always see in Scripture where they're worshiping like golden calves and these statues and something they've carved out. And the thing is that they just didn't have all the resources that we did. It might look weird back then, but we do the same thing. There was this story I read about this guy was a missionary in India. And he came back and he was talking to his friend, and he said, you know, it's weird, in all the houses there in the center of the living room, they put up this statue, this god in their living room. And then all the chairs around is all facing towards this center object. So they all come together as a family and praise this idol, this god. And the guy he was talking to thought it was pretty weird. You know, he didn't know that stuff still happened these days, you know. So he thought it was strange. So he went home, he got in his recliner, grabbed his remote control and turned the TV on. And while he was looking around, he noticed every chair in his living room was facing that television. It wasn't any different, you know. And I know what you're thinking, well, TV can't become a god. If TV can become a god, anything can become a god, and that's exactly right, man. Anything can take your devotion, your worship away from God. We can't think of it as something simple. It's simply put, a god is what we sacrifice for and what we pursue. Anything can become a god in our lives if we ignore it. Some questions you can ask, kind of decipher out maybe if there's a problem, is what disappoints you? You know, we all got things that disappoint us, but what truly disappoints you to the point where it's hard for you to carry on? It might be a sign that something's become more important to us than it should be. And it also might show that we placed hope in something other than God. Another question, what do you complain about most? That's a good one, right? Might not want to admit it, but maybe you should ask somebody else, what do you complain about the most? What we complain about reveals what really matters to us. Finances, maybe money's become too important. And I know we don't talk about money in church, right? Because that's a bad subject, but I'm telling you, the whole purpose of tithing, the whole purpose of money not controlling your life is because God doesn't want money to put up a wall between you and Him. That's the whole purpose of that. I know a lot of people, and me including myself early on, man, I was like, man, what does the church need money for? What do they need my money for? I'm coming there for them to give me something. But what I didn't realize is that was money controlling me. That was money getting between what God wanted for me. And God doesn't want anything to come between us. Maybe what other people say, other people's opinions. I know we live in a society where we want to please people, right? Sometimes. Maybe not all the time. But when people say something against us, it's irritating. It makes us mad. And maybe that's because other people's opinions have become more important to you. And to me, this might be a brash way of thinking, but I think as a Christian, man, I don't think other people's opinions should matter, to be honest, because I'm going after what God says about me. I only care about what God says about me because, as we know, that's the truth. I love Ephesians 2:10 where God calls us His masterpiece. And the reason I love that is because I'm an art nerd, you know. I love music. I love art. And to me, have y'all ever seen the painting, the Mona Lisa? To me, it's ugly, you know. Like, nobody knows if it's a guy or if it's a girl, you know, and there's, is it a smiling? Is he or she smiling? Or is it a smirk? And I don't know what's going on in the background, but to me, it's ugly. But that was a masterpiece. And it only mattered to the creator. See, the person creating it was like, there is nothing more I can do to this. This is it. This is as good as it gets. It doesn't get any better. And even though I think it's ugly, He never thought so. He thought it was perfect. And that's how God sees us. God sees us as, you're a masterpiece. You're done. There's nothing more I can do to make you any better. And to me, that's all that matters. But when we allow the opinions of others to infiltrate, we start trying to meet those opinions and meet that approval, then a problem happens. And then you see young girls trying to look at the appearance of a girl on a magazine, thinking that that's what perfection is, when the whole time God has told her she's already a masterpiece. But yet, the views of society and the views of her friends have taken over. In other words, they become a god. And I think it's funny, I was talking the other day how Christians like to unite and boycott places that maybe don't have their views, right? And to me, it's just odd because, you know, these companies never came out and said they supported Christian values anyway. So it doesn't change anything, you know? And I'm thinking, well, if that's the opinion we have and we're so concerned with other people's views, then where are we going to get gas from, you know? Because I'm telling you, we start valuing other things more important than what God's putting in. Another one that's good is if you complain about the kind of year your team has. I know this ain't going to win me any friends here, but maybe sports have become too important, you know? I mean, if the performance of your football team impacts the attitude to the point where you're angry afterwards, you know? Or maybe it impacts your worship of Jesus the next day at church, or even maybe it impacts you even going to church, if it was that bad of a loss. There might be a God in your life that wasn't intended to be. And don't get me wrong, it's not bad to pull for a particular team. It's not bad to have passion for a team. But it is wrong to love them so much that we allow them to dictate our attitude. I mean, it's just honest. I mean, when something can transform us from being the man or the woman of God that we're called to be, there might be an issue. And I'm not preaching to you because I've done this, man. I used to be a huge hockey fan. My wife can attest. When the Stars are in the playoffs, man, everything shuts down. We're there, you know? But I realized that. I mean, way back when they were actually in playoffs, you know, I would notice that if they lost, I was done. That whole next day was terrible. And I would get the paper and read every little thing, you know, thinking it's going to change anything, but it just made it worse, you know? And I realized there was an issue in that. You know, it's just a game. You know, you hear that all the time, right? But some of us take it a little serious. Believe me, I work at a fire station, and I'm going to tell you something, man. When them guys get into that football game, it completely changes. It's crazy. But like I said, it's not bad to pull. I'm not sitting here saying, oh, don't watch sports at all. I'm just saying don't let it overcome your life. Don't let it become a place between you and God to where it can dictate who you are. I think it's funny, like football stadiums to me are like the greatest centers of worship there is, man, because you got to realize people are waiting months to get there, and then they're partying out in the parking lot, tailgating, you know, they paint themselves up, wear the clothes, you know, out there screaming, fights break out sometimes. And then we look at back in the Old Testament, and we see pretty much the same kind of thing, man. And it's just a thing, you know, if you can tell me stats of your favorite player, but you can't find your way out of a Bible to save yourself, man, I think it's time to start looking at things, you know. But like I said, if it can transform you from being the man or the woman of God you're called to be, then you might want to look into it. The other thing is, where's your sanctuary, right? Like, where do you go when you're hurting? Where do you go when you're seeking pleasure? We talked about TV, man. Anything can become food, right? We even got a term for food, right? Comfort food. Man, I know people in my life, real close to my life, that when it gets bad, man, chocolate is coming out in full force, you know? I'm playing. No, I'm not. You know, alcohol. A lot of times when we get stressed, we need a drink, you know. And we see where that leads, you know. Food leads to binging, to health problems. If we're so stressed out that we need to drink every time we get stressed, then alcohol comes into play, and then alcoholism, disease kicks in. You just got to watch things, you know. Like, I don't drink, but I guarantee you I know what time happy hour is at Sonic, right? I know it's 2 o'clock somewhere, man. Like, when I get stressed, I need caffeine, you know. And that's where I go, and it's not any different. You know, you look at Coke or alcohol, it's not any different. It's the same thing. It's placing my stress or my relief from stress in something other than God. See, I want to be the kind of believer that goes to God in every situation. Man, when it's good, it's great to praise, but when it's bad, I also want to praise. I don't want to let something come between me and God, even the bad stuff. Because when we do that, we place another God in our life that takes the throne away from our true God. And if we ignore it, it just takes over. It's funny to me that some of the gifts that God gives us, we turn into a God. You know, I mean, it's like your kid wants a video game, play, I don't even know whether PlayStation, PS4, 10, 15, I don't know. They want to play a video game, right? They don't have it. And you love your kid so much, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to get it for you. And then you get them this video game system, and you're the greatest parent in the world, man. They love you, they're hugging you, they're kissing you. And then a day later, you go to talk to them, and they're like, I ain't got time for you, I'm playing a game. Right? And they quit coming to dinner. They quit hanging out with the family. They're all consumed with that game. And the problem is that we have gods in our lives when the gifts become more important than the giver. And we do this in a lot of things, you know. Sex is the biggest one, you know. And it's funny how if you say that in church, people kind of get uneasy, right? But the thing is, it was an invention of God, man. It was a gift of God. We should be taking it back for what it is instead of allowing it to be perverted by the society we live in. And because it's perverted, it becomes a God because our focus is solely on that rather than the giver. Pornography becomes gods in people's lives. And I know it's standard to think, yeah, them guys, they have a problem with that stuff. But it ain't just guys. That used to be the thing. Guys only have issues with that. But I'm telling you, 50 Shades of Grey didn't become very popular because guys were coming together with book clubs and reading it together, you know? Magic Mike didn't make money at the box office because guys were taking their buddies to see it. It's a huge problem. And I think that's an example that we should take, the fact that the gifts that God gives us, man, if it becomes more important than God himself, then it's going to turn ugly. And it just blows me away that, you know, like the porn industry, like as a youth pastor, we teach all about it, about sex and the purpose for it. And I've had parents get mad before, and my heart is if you don't want to teach them and you don't want them to learn in a biblical context, then MTV has no problem teaching them. Hollywood has no problem teaching them. So we got to take it back, you know? And the thing is, it's not just money that's sacrificed for it. It's marriages, it's the relationships with your children. I've seen careers get lost by worshiping a God that wasn't our one true God. But we look to him for a sanctuary. It says in Psalms 46, verse 1, it says, God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. See there? Psalms, he's always ready to help. It's just if we're going to go to him or not. And the thing is we talk about like all these different things that become gods, and it's fun to enjoy the things in the world without actually worshiping them. See, our worship should be reserved for the one that took our place, right? The one that took our place on the cross, the one who absorbed God's wrath so we wouldn't have to, who brought us from death to life. That's what I was talking about, man. That's the kind of believer I want to be. And I'm not sitting here telling you this stuff because I've conquered it all and I'm perfect and you need to follow me. I guarantee you I got problems. But the thing is that I've realized it and I need to make changes. It's the whole point. Enjoy this world, but worship one true God. There's a story in Scripture that reminds me of this, and it's in 1 Kings chapter 18, and it's titled The Contest on Mount Carmel. And there was this king named Ahab. He was king of Israel at this time. And it's funny that this is his profile. This is what Scripture says about him. It says he did more to provoke the anger of the Lord than any other kings of Israel before him. Man, you talk about not winning friends. It's sitting here saying that he was the worst. He did more to provoke the anger of the Lord than anything. And the reason for this was that he set up false gods. He set up different gods for them to worship other than the one true God. In other words, he set up a god named Baal. And in general, Baal was like a fertility god that was believed to enable the earth to produce crops and help people to produce children. You know, it's just mythology, some made up stuff. But then there was this prophet of God named Elijah. And he was sent to tell this King Ahab that, you know, because you're setting up all these false gods in your life, we're going to send you a drought. And a drought was huge back in those days because they needed water for everything. The crops, they needed crops to eat. They needed crops for their animals to be fed. So when they had no rain, you could imagine the turmoil that was about to come into place. So, of course, we all want to kill the messenger, right? Elijah, man, he took off hiding because Ahab was going to kill him because he told him, hey, this drought's coming for you and it's all your fault. So during the third year of this drought, God sends Elijah back to deliver another message to Ahab that the drought would soon end. And here's the thing. God withholds his blessing in the very areas in which we lift up these false gods. See, Ahab was establishing these false gods, and God's not going to bless you in your life when you're holding up a god instead of him. He's not going to bless an area of your life that robs him of his place on the throne of your heart, that robs him of your worship. So then this battle's about to take place, right? The fight is on, and back then they even trash talked. It said, when Ahab saw him, he said, "So it is really you troublemaker of Israel." Elijah replies, "I've made no trouble. You and your family are the troublemakers." Like he's saying, your own mama. "For you have refused to obey the commands of the Lord and have worshipped the images of Baal instead." So they summon all the people of Israel and the 450 prophets of Baal and some 400 prophets of Asherah. And it says once they all arrived, and understand, when they summoned all these people of Israel, these weren't lost people. These were people who knew God. It wasn't like they didn't know God, they didn't know who he was. These were people, these were believers, and they knew God. But when they all arrived, it says Elijah stood in front of them and said, "How much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him." And it said they were completely silent. And I think they were completely silent because they wanted both. They wanted to worship these false gods in their life, but they also wanted to follow God as well. But as Elijah said, you can't have it both ways. Remember that commandment, right? You should have no God before me. You can't have it both ways. It doesn't work that way. There's no middle ground. In other words, we need to make a choice and we need to stand on that choice. And that's basically what he was saying to them. Invite God into our lives, yet sometimes we still play with another. He said you can't invite a God into your life and then pay attention to someone else. Choose this day who you will serve. And I like that because it says choose this day. In other words, it's a daily thing that we need to do. We can't just assume, okay, I'm Christian, I gave my life to Christ, I'm gone, I'm on with the next thing. To me, a relationship with God is kind of like a relationship with your wife or your husband. You're constantly learning things about them. If you're not, guess what happens? Trouble happens in that marriage. And I think we need to see that with our relationship as God. We need to constantly be learning, constantly be seeking more information, getting closer as time goes on. So a challenge is issued. If y'all know the story, Elijah told the prophets of this false god Baal, you know what? Cut up a bull, put him on a bunch of wood, and we're going to call down our gods to light it on fire. So whoever does it, that's how we'll know who the true God is. And Elijah, being the nice God follower he was, he let them go first. So they prepared it. And then they started calling the name of Baal from morning until noontime, shouting, "Oh, Baal, answer us." But there was no reply of any kind. Then they danced, hobbling around the altar they had made. And of course, like any sympathetic man of God would do, Elijah began mocking them. Right? He said, "You'll have to shout louder, for surely he is a god. Perhaps he is daydreaming or is relieving himself, or maybe he is away on a trip or is asleep and needs to be wakened." I like this guy. He's sarcastic, you know. He'd fit in really well at this church. I'm telling you. So verse 28 goes on and said they started shouting louder, and following their normal customs, they cut themselves with knives and swords until blood gushed out. They raved all afternoon until the time of the evening sacrifice, but still there was no sound, no reply, no response. They raved. They cut themselves. To me, this tells me that the object of our worship will ultimately determine the level of our joy. It's funny being in youth ministry. You know, I've dealt with teens that had problems with cutting themselves, you know, and I never really understood it, so I never really knew how to, you know, encourage them until I started reading Scripture and reading it a little bit closer like this. You know, cutting is nothing new. It's been going on since biblical times. It proves it right here. And the problem with it is just your worship is misplaced. It's basically what it comes down to. Their worship was misplaced, so they were cutting themselves. And if you'll notice, there was no response. In other words, they were worshiping God that was taking away their lives, but yet leaving them with nothing. And that's what happens when we build up gods in our lives. It'll take us away. Our every moment will be sacrificed for it, and we'll get nothing in return. It says, then Elijah called to the people, "Come over here." They all crowded around him as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. That's huge right there. They crowded around him as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. I think that's what happens when we have gods built up in our life. The one we have built up towards our one true God gets torn down. I mean, if we neglect anything for any amount of time, it's going to eventually ruin. You stick a brand new car out in the field 10 years later, I guarantee you, it's going to be ruined. And that's what was going on here. They had this new God that they were worshiping, so their old God just fell to the wayside. But I like Elijah comes back to repair it, and he says, "O Lord, today prove that you are God and that I am your servant. O Lord, answer me. Answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God and that you have brought them back to yourself." I like that too, brought them back to yourself. See, even though sometimes we get straight off a path, following some other God, God never leaves us. God never gives up on us. It says, immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the bull, the wood, the stones, the dust. It says, when all the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, "The Lord, He is God." Yes, the Lord is God. See, I think it's funny the contrast between Elijah and these other prophets. They were doing this dance, they were raving, they were going crazy, they were cutting themselves, and nothing. Elijah, all he did is call out to God. There was no vain reputations needed, no bodily contortions, no abusing of the body, just a simple plea from a servant brought responses from an almighty God. He wasn't busy talking, he wasn't busy pursuing something else, he wasn't on a journey, he wasn't sleeping. He was there waiting on his call from a servant. And I've heard this story. I remember hearing this story a lot when I was a kid, but I never heard the end of it. And it says, Elijah commanded, "Seize all the prophets of Baal, don't let a single one escape." So they were seized, and Elijah took them down to Kishon Valley and killed them there. Killed them all. And it's sad because 450 people lost their lives because they worshiped the wrong God. I was talking to somebody who was, you don't ever see stories played out like that when you're a kid, right? You don't see a Precious Moment Bible with 450 people getting slaughtered in it, right? You don't see David and Goliath, it's about a kid throwing a stone at somebody. It's not even going down there and hacking his head off and then hauling it around. I think we should do that, man. It might scare, but hey, maybe that's what we need at an early age. But I'll be honest with you guys, be as transparent as I can. I had a time in my life not too long ago where I realized this was taking place in my life. And this should point out that it can happen anywhere. Man, I was head of a ministry that was doing awesome. I'm talking, you think you're doing things for God, that's great. I mean, it was growing, and you could see people's lives being changed and testimonies being shown out to everybody. And it was awesome. I'm like, yeah, I'm a part of this. This is great. But what I didn't realize is that spiritually, man, I wasn't growing at all. I was in an environment that wasn't meeting my spiritual needs, and I knew it. God was telling me, God was making it simple, man, and I just didn't see it. Because what I was thinking is, the ministry I'm a part of is flourishing. So obviously this is the right thing. But it made me realize God never said impress me. He just said to obey. Man, and I refused. And my spiritual growth just died. I was gone. And I'm telling you, the satisfaction that comes from small things that you build up, they're not going to last. Because like I said, I thought I was doing some great things for God, but yet God was calling me away the whole time, and I was just ignoring it. So eventually, thank goodness, I did listen. And it never made sense to me until I met a friend here in Canton. And to be honest, I was going there to get a pat on the back, right? Like I wanted somebody to say, you were right, you did a good job, man. People are mean to you. That's what I wanted. Right? We want to blame other people. It makes it so much easier, and it makes you feel better about yourself. But like those series we just got through doing, The Right Day, this was the right day in my life. This buddy of mine is a man of God, and he doesn't hold anything back. So I met him, because I was having trouble getting over this, and I said, explained everything to the minor details. And like I said, I was wanting the pat on the back. I was wanting a little bit of support. But what he told me, man, it blew me away. It irritated me. It made me mad. But it was the one thing I needed to hear, and it changed my life. He sat there and told me, it sounds like you've made up an idol in your life. And I never saw that the whole time. And it was true. Even in a church setting, I was sitting there making something greater than the God I came there to serve. And like I said, I was too busy trying to impress God when all He wanted me to do was obey. And the thing is don't think for a second that it's absurd or it's an exaggeration to label something insignificant in your life as possibly becoming a God, because chances are it probably has already. And the thing is that the false gods that we have in our life that take the place of our one true God, the only way they're defeated are by being removed. They need to be replaced, actually. Instead of just removing it, we need to replace them. It's kind of like fixing a car the way I do, man. If I'm driving down the road and my engine's starting to make noise, you know how I fix it? I turn the music up just a little bit louder, and it goes away. It doesn't fix the problem, but it goes away temporarily, right? And we just cover it up. It's still there. It's kind of like Matthew chapter 15, verse 8, where it says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship is a joke. We can't just cover up the symptoms. We've got to cure the illness. And if you dig down far enough, maybe there is a God that's taken the place of our one true God. And the thing is, we can't ignore to the point where we don't hear anymore. My wife is a military brat. She used to live on the Air Force Base, and she said the planes would be going by all the time, and it was loud. But eventually, if you just ignored it long enough, you wouldn't hear it anymore. And that's what I don't want to do. I don't want to ignore God to the point where I don't hear it anymore. And I came close that one time. We got to understand that our thoughts, our attitudes, and eventually our actions are determined by what God we decide to worship. And there is only one true God to live for, abide in, seek after, place hope in, and reign over us. David said it best in Psalm 16:5. He said, Lord, you alone are my inheritance, my cup of blessing. You guard all that is mine. My choice is you, God, first and only. We'll pray for you guys.
It's not for me till I'm 90.